Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you all. My name is Melinda Cooper. I want to welcome you to the 4th International Shakespeare in Prisons Conference. Before we begin, I'd like to invite everyone to post a digital land acknowledgement into the chat. A land acknowledgement is a statement that formally recognizes Indigenous peoples as stewards of the land and pays respect to the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. I'll go first. I'm copying and pasting it into the chat right now. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Mine says, I'm joining this virtual space from the ancestral land of the Kumeyaay tribe who cultivated and thrived in this region for 12,000 years before colonizers showed up to steal the land, which is known today as San Diego. As I said before, I'm Melinda Cooper. I'm a certified project management professional with a background in theater, program development, and arts engagement. I'm a co-producer of this conference today, and I'm thrilled to be here to introduce our fine group of guests. We are joined by a group of alumni from the Shakespeare in Prisons program at Detroit Public Theater, who are contributing authors to the book called Richard III in Prison, a Critical Edition, which consists of the full text of Shakespeare's play, footnotes in the words of Shakespeare in Prison program members, as well as essays by those who worked on the play while in prison. This is a question and answer conversation following up on their pre-recorded session where they discussed what working on the book means to them and the importance of the project as a means of breaking down stereotypes, asserting that the voices of returned citizens matter, and creating access, passion, and ownership of Shakespeare for people who have historically been alienated from it. It was a fantastic conversation. I watched it. I said, you got to let me introduce this group. I'd be so honored. So thank you, Scott and Kurt, for letting me take the floor for a moment to acknowledge the fine work of this group of people. And I invite everyone here to please join me in welcoming program alumni Jessica Christopher, Asia Johnson, and Sarah Lauderdale, as well as their co-collaborators, Director Franny Shepard-Bates and Assistant Director Matthew Van Meter of Detroit Public Theater's Shakespeare in Prisons program. Thank you all for taking the time to come. And thank you so much for being here to answer some of our questions and to ask some of our questions. I'm going to invite Franny to take it from here. Franny?
Thank you for that fabulous introduction. And hello, everyone. I was going to say good afternoon, but I don't know where you all are. So just hello. We're all really excited to be back to having given our overview and being, so excited about our project and everything to drill down into some of the details of the project today and to answer any questions you might have. And to try really hard not to ramble, but we'll call each other out if we do, because we do. I'm doing it right now. So to kind of recap a little bit, our project, so we're Shakespeare in Prison, and we are a program that is freshly 9 years old through Detroit Public Theater in Michigan. And we work both inside prisons and also post-release, as evidenced by this project we're talking about today, which is our very own critical edition of Richard III. And to recap that a bit, what we did was in our 2016-2017 season at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility, our ensemble worked on Richard III for about 40 weeks, a little more than 40 weeks, excuse me. First reading and analyzing and discussing the play, and then collaboratively casting and designing it, and finally, and rehearsing it, and then finally performing it. And then 2 years later, one of the members of our men's ensemble had an idea that would essentially, as he said, take our work and do other people's work for them by giving them essentially a book that would include the work that we had done. And that idea snowballed, and here we are today. Having reconvened a panel of alumni such as Sarah and Jessica and Asia, who will be here in just a few minutes, to meet on Zoom, because we're all over the place, and go through our analytical process, again, to put together a critical edition of Richard III, where all of the analysis, essays, Q&As, and all of that is in verbatim quotations from these women and the others in that ensemble who worked on the play. So to give a little more detail on that, the idea was had in very early 2019. We did with Jessica and Michaela and Asia, we did kind of a test run. Also in early 2019, we were given funding, very generous funding from Michigan Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities to get the project rolling in the summer of 2019. And then we did, and we got to know Zoom really, really well, which came in handy when we all went on Zoom in March of 2020. And our group was like, well, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And so from there, we talked through the play again, using a very similar process to the one we used in prison, which we'll talk about momentarily before we start taking questions and everything. And everybody's working on their own material for the book that they're contributing. Matt Van Meter, our hero, took this vast trove of material and created a manuscript out of it. And now where we're at now is we've got that manuscript, we've got this other material, we have a sample layout that I'm going to show you in just a second here. We've got our sample, and we are kind of ready to move from developing the material into the next phase. So because this can be a little bit difficult to describe without a visual, I will now share a visual. So this is a possible way we see this being laid out. So what we see is on the left-hand side here, we have the text of the play. And below the line, we have notes directly related to the text, which are things like, here you see an explanation of, the two-syllable bruised here. Some of our goals have to do with accessibility to the material. And so we want to make sure we're including notes that will help create some of that accessibility. And that'll be our below the line stuff. Over here on the right, though, is really the core of the project, which is these notes that are in these verbatim quotations by ensemble members. So we have right here kind of a general note about relating to the character of Richard in a personal way. And then we have these line-specific analytical notes. Each woman, because we're not able to identify by name the women who are incarcerated or who are no longer incarcerated, but we don't know how to get a hold of them. Each of these women has an icon as a way of making an attribution on that analysis, so that, which these are designed by another alum of our program. And the women who contributed both on the inside and on the outside would have two symbols. So it's a little tough to see here, but this here is a dagger, and this is the same dagger, but shaded in a bit. There are also, as we kind of scroll down, and Matt is going to share this file so that you've got it. We've also commissioned original artwork other than those icons from that same alum. And we will also be including photos. This is some of those women rehearsing Act 4, Scene 1, which is the scene here. And also scrolling down, this has been the most fun ever doing this layout, not being a graphic designer. Performance notes, notes having to do specifically with performing the play. So again, this is something we'd be working with a publisher on, but that's kind of our way of quickly explaining the project without a zillion words, especially for people who aren't familiar with editions like this. Some of our goals have to do with, again, getting this out to as many people as we possibly can, including people who are working in academia and scholarship, people in all kinds of schools, community organizations, theaters that this would be helpful to, people who are practitioners of doing this work, this kind of work, and maybe most importantly, getting the book into the hands of people who are incarcerated, who may not have access to it otherwise, and we'll get into that in a second as well. So I've said enough about that, I think. I'm going to throw it to Matt and ask if you can take a couple, minute or two to describe our analytical process, which is largely the same on the inside as it is out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the overview, Franny. So when we're inside, our seasons run about 40 to 45 weeks, meeting 2.5 hours per session twice a week. So it's a lot of time. Those of you who teach will know that it's a real luxury to be able to spend that amount of time on one play. And so what we do generally is we start out just reading the text, discussing it. We spend a lot of time with that, doing sort of what in theater would be called table work, as well as getting up to do sort of performances and seeing how performing the text informs our understanding of it and the characters before we go into casting and people have a chance to dig into individual characters. And as an organization, we and this is largely an extension of our fearless leaders brain. We take fairly extensive notes. So starting several years ago, we started taking, really hundreds of pages of notes over the course of a season as facilitators, most of which are verbatim quotations from ensemble members. And so we have saved all of these. And so we were able to go back into our 2016-2017 season when we did Richard III at Michigan's women's prison, and have hundreds of quotations, many of which were just sort of off the cuff observations, but many of which were really important, interesting, analytical commentary on the text and characters and situations of Richard III. So with that in hand, we gathered a group of alums, some of which are with us right now, people who had been incarcerated and in our ensemble during our Richard III season. And we gathered up every other Sunday for the better part of a year to once again read through the entire play scene by scene and discuss it. We recorded those conversations. We hired an alum of our men's ensemble to transcribe those conversations. And so we used that as another source of this commentary. And so partly to fill in gaps, but also partly to put people's perspectives in dialogue with what they were thinking several years earlier, when they were in prison and encountering that text for the first time, with how they see it now on a second go around several years later, living in the free world. So that trove of material we edited down into commentary on the play, general comments and line comments like Franny showed you, and that formed the real basis of the core of the text.
And in terms of the way that, and I'm sorry, Matt, did you mention the mechanics of the discussions themselves, or because I can cover that really quick?
Sure, yeah, go for it. So
the way that we do these discussions and the way that we get these quotes is that we we'll go through the scenes sometimes we'll go through large chunks of the scene, sometimes smaller chunks. We read it aloud, we'll pause, make sure everybody is on the same page about the content, and then we'll keep going. And then once we've gotten through however much of the scene we think we need to before we start discussing, we'll just have kind of an open discussion, and build from there. With the idea that everybody's right and everybody's a different kind of right. And we do use, and this is developed over the years, we will use one of the SparkNotes No Fear editions of the play as on the one hand. And then we also started using, and this is all ensemble members' ideas, we also started using, an Arden or a Cambridge for folks who like to take in the information in different ways. And in that we're able to really have these really rich discussions because everybody is bringing their own understanding of the play to the table based on the text that speaks to them the best way. And so we did that with our Zoom discussions as well.
It's worth noting that really a couple of veteran ensemble members really demanded using scholarly texts. Mm-hmm. People who had become quite familiar with Shakespeare's language and wanted to do more of a deep dive than could be done with the No Fear.
And then certain people reminded them not to be snobs.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Really quick. So not really quick. I have like one question for each of our alums who are here today. So, Sarah, if I could ask you first a question. The first mock-up that we did was of a few pages from King Lear with notes from men's ensemble members. Mm-hmm. And when we showed that mock-up to members of our women's ensemble, Sarah was one of the first people to get a look at that. And I wonder, Sarah, if you could take a minute and just share some of what your reaction was to that.
I was extremely excited and also slightly jealous that Matt decided to use the men's ensemble and not the women's like first go round, but it was fine. No, I wanted to do something like that. I thought that would be like amazing for the women to be able to participate in such a cool project. It reminded me a lot of like, we used the No Fear, I personally needed the No Fear version that had like the translation and then the Shakespeare language, just because I'd never really read Shakespeare before, so it was really helpful. And I think that when I saw the pages that Matt put together, I was like, wow, it's like No Fear except the Persian version of it, and like we're so much smarter than the No Fear version of it. So I don't know, we just put a lot of color into it. So I was really excited and wanted to like do a whole book,
which made Matt and me like, we got to do this, and we got to find funding for it, and we got to find time for it, and like this has to happen. So my next question, because Asia Johnson has joined us. Hello, Asia. My next question is kind of returning back to when we are in prison and we're having these discussions in a circle, what you feel like, what your perspective is on what it is about that process that helps to encourage and empower people to share their own insight, whether they're coming at it feeling like they've got a good handle on the material, or like a lot of people say, like, I'm not smart enough to read a book like this, but we end up hearing from everybody. So what's your perspective on kind of what helps make that happen?
I think just first, creating a safe space. You have to have like that safe space in order to feel comfortable sharing anything. And oftentimes women historically have felt like their voice doesn't matter and like their thoughts don't matter. And we aren't meant to think about these themes in this story. And that's just historically speaking. But when you're inside of that place, like you're coming from a place of trauma, you're coming from a place of silence, and being in community with other women makes it a comfortable space. And being in company with Matt too. Matt, you make it a safe space too, not just all the women. We share about not just the text, but about our lives, and that makes it comfortable. But also, I feel like we all have that confidence within us, and Franny and Matt really help to facilitate the growth and the sprouting of those things that have always been inside of us. And things that like that atmosphere tries to stifle in you, tries to suffocate you, tries to silence you, like I said. So it's just being in that circle is one of the best parts of the week.
Thanks, Asia. Awesome. Okay, I have one more question before we wanted to answer everybody else's questions. And that question is for Jessica. Jessica, we have been talking about how a really good example of where some of this analysis comes from, which was part of your experience contributing an essay to the book's manuscript. So do you think you could take a minute or two and share what you were sharing with me with everybody else?
Sure. So part of what I am doing, as well as the discussions, the bi-weekly Sunday night discussions, is I'm writing an essay, and it was very open-ended about what I could write, which to me is incredibly difficult because I like parameters. I'm a person that really enjoys guidelines and rules, and like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. So I struggled for a long time about what I was actually going to write about. What part of this play was I going to analyze? I mean, I have admitted time and time again, not a huge fan of Richard III. Out of all of the plays, I was not super thrilled that we were doing this analysis on Richard. But what ended up happening was I had this entire view of what I was going to write. And it wasn't like I felt like it was kind of glossing over. It was kind of a cop-out. And so I kind of like, I wrote it and I was, like not feeling super great about it. And then just kind of like put it on the back burner. And then just one day there was a situation in my career life that like it had everything to do with Richard. And I wasn't thinking about, the essay. I wasn't thinking about Shakespeare, but it just really sparked something in me. And so I was like, okay, that's what I need to write about. I think that there's something to be said about returning citizens writing about their experiences behind bars, but more so about what happens when we get home and like how we do contribute to society and taking those experiences. And the best part about this book for me is that we're showing people that, Shakespeare is timeless and it does relate to life. Like you're going to hear from women of all different walks of life. Our ensemble is very diverse in that respect, which sometimes does cause conflict. It makes us have discussions that aren't super easy to have, but it also makes us have to, look outside ourselves. But when you look at this book and you see those notes and, because the women on the inside, they're a part of this too. Like that's the part we have to remember that. Like they're a huge part of this project. They may not have a voice right now at any kind of conference and they may not be recorded, but trust me when I say that they laid the foundation for everything that's happening with the book. So to just be able to correlate Shakespeare to, as a part of today's life, that's huge. So yeah, I just think that the process, while I tend to overthink things, it actually ended up just being more natural when I stopped overthinking it. And that was, and it proved what I've been telling people for years, like Shakespeare is a part of your life. Like it's still relevant today. So yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. I see that Karen posted a question in the chat, which is a really amazing question. And so Karen, in the words of the illustrious Scott Jackson, if I could welcome you into the space to ask your question, and I think that Matt would be the guy to answer that one.
Great, thanks, Franny. So my question is, since I am a teacher, do you think it might be possible to recreate some of this structure of opportunity in a classroom? If so, how? And then I'd also love to hear from the alums. How would you change the classrooms that you have been in to make them more open to this kind of connection and growth? So we can start with Matt, but I'd really love to hear from the alums as well.
Yeah, I would too. So I'm also a teacher of both high school and college, and I think for me, I tried to, being a facilitator with Shakespeare in Prison has made me a better teacher. It has made me prioritize creating a safe space within the classroom for people to be open to ideas and open to being vulnerable, voicing ideas that might be controversial, and hopefully also being less careful with their words when being careful with your words is about stifling rather than sensitivity, right? Because one of the things I really value about the circle in Shakespeare in Prison is that people are willing to say things that might be controversial, but never once will say things and get away with it that are insensitive once that safety has been created. However, I think the way that we treat education and classrooms in this country makes that an uphill battle, because everything in those classrooms, especially in high school and to some extent in college, is so high stakes, and students are taught to value being right over being honest. And I think that makes it really, really hard. And I would love to hear what our alums have to say about that.
Yeah, who wants it? Jessica wants it.
So I work for an organization that works with women in recovery, early recovery. And what really struck me was when Matt said, people tend to try to filter themselves, right? So I'm working with a woman right now who, she does that to me all the time when we talk. And I finally said to her, I was like, have I done something that makes you feel like you have to censor what you're saying? Because if I have, like, I apologize. I want to know how you're feeling. Like, you're a person, I'm a person. Let's just talk like we're people, right? And so when I first came home, my first like really professional job was running a teen program for kids with mental illness, addictions, and disabilities. And I pretty much based the entire program on the way that we ran the circle at, inside, because I needed them to know that, like, I am here for you. This is a safe space, and like, you matter and you have a voice. And I think it was so abnormal for them that it took a really long time for them to get to the point where they could be open and just like vulnerable. We would do some kind of theater, just like little game. They didn't realize it was a theater game. And in the beginning, they were all very closed off, and they just kind of felt like, funny about it, because you do look a little absurd when you're doing some of these. But then by the end of the year, they had all opened up, and they like would encourage the other ones, like the new people, to come in and like enjoy it. And so I think, yeah, there's a huge problem with the fact that in the education system, starting from when, they're kids, they're listening to somebody basically lecture them, right? It needs to be more collaborative, and they have to have a voice in it. I just presented right before this to a social work class, and it was interesting to me that in a social work class, we weren't going into breakout sessions, and we weren't, trying to figure out solutions for what we were talking about. They just had a panel, like a panel of people talking about the issues. These are the kids that want to solve the problems. Like, they're going to be the ones to do it. So we're definitely going to learn a lot as far as how we educate. And I think that educators need to learn from other, people in theater, people in social work, people that have received the same services that, some of these agencies are offering. It just, the discussion needs to be bigger than just educators.
Sarah or Asia, do you have anything to add, or should we see if anyone else has an additional question? Asia, you got something?
I was just going to say, the vulnerability also in a classroom setting seems so one-sided. Educators kind of like expect